Our week 6 webinar is focused on the advocacy work that we do at Development and Peace. And in our advocacy work, in a particular way today, we want to highlight the For the Love of Creation campaign. So we're going to be focused and talking about the importance of advocacy in the mission of Development and Peace. And we're going to hear some moving testimonies about why that's important. And in today's world right now on March 27th, what we can be doing to engage in that advocacy mission that Development and Peace has through the For the Love of Creation initiative. But as always, we will begin with a land acknowledgement. And this is a good opportunity to also tell everybody on our webinar today how we will be inviting you to use and interact with us today. So you will see there is a comment section. And so the comment box will be open and people can put comments in the comment box as we go. So the comment box is for chatting and comments. And then we have the Q&A box. And so if people have questions, you can type a question into the Q&A, and we will have time in the webinar for our Q&A. But for our land acknowledgement, I'm going to invite any of the 46 people who are with us on the webinar right now, and anybody who's watching on Facebook can put it in the Facebook comments, to offer a land acknowledgement where you are joining us from today. So, and I will begin by offering that I am joining us all, joining everybody here from Toronto, which has been the home of many nations through history and is part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Covenant, which is an agreement to share the land and care for it for future generations. So I invite anybody who is with us to also put your land acknowledgements in the chat, in the comments box right now. And I can see there. Great. Thanks, Estella. I see lots of them coming into the comments right now. Great. So I'll invite people to continue to putting their land acknowledgements in the chat as we now proceed with our opening prayer. So let us put ourselves before God. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen. This prayer comes to us from Pope Francis and his 2020 encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which of course has been a central focus for us in our Share Lent campaign this year under the theme of Share Love, Share Lent. So we want to begin by offering a very quick and brief reflection on the importance of advocacy in the mission of Development and Peace. And at the heart of our advocacy is our belief in human dignity. When we carry out advocacy at Development and Peace, we are not campaigning for a political ideology, or we are always focused on the human person, the real lives of people who are touched, who are oppressed, impoverished by unjust policies and economic systems. And so as a reminder of that, and to call our attention to that as we begin this webinar today, they want to put before us today the person of Maria Felicita Lopez, with her daughter Hilda. Maria is the face of the Share Lent campaign this year. She's a 31-year-old Lenca indigenous woman from Honduras, and she is engaged in advocacy for human dignity herself with the support of development and peace, fighting for the rights of her community that is threatened by a hydroelectric dam in Honduras. And if you want to learn more and hear more about her story, I've put in the comment box a link to an article in the Catholic Register where you can really read more about Maria. So let's think about Maria as a way of remembering that human dignity is at the heart of the advocacy work that we do at Development and Peace. So why is advocacy important for development and peace? Well, here's our big, long mission statement. And I want to highlight one part of the mission statement. That development and peace educates the Canadian population about the causes of impoverishment of people. So there's the education piece, but it doesn't stop there. And mobilizes actions for change. In the struggle for human dignity, development and peace associates with social change groups in the North and the South. I'll just say that one more time. Mobilizes actions for change. And in the struggle for human dignity, development and peace associates with social change groups in the North and South. This is an essential part of our mission, in addition to raising funds to support our brothers and sisters, our partners in the Global South, in their pursuit of alternatives to unjust social, political, and economic structures. And the reason it's in our mission statement is because we see how everything in the world is interconnected. And this is the message of Pope Francis all the time. So the wealth, our analysis of why poverty exists in the world is that the wealth of industrialized nations of the world is connected to the impoverishment of our brothers and sisters in the Global South. And so tackling the problem of global poverty, global injustice, cannot just be simply about sharing resources with the Global South, but recognizing that the very systems that use the resources that God has given us on the earth need to be transformed. And that means changing structures here where we live as well. In fact, that work in many ways is the most important when it comes to our true hope in a more just world in the future. Doing advocacy work to change systems of injustice that perpetuate poverty and oppression on our brothers and sisters in the Global South, systems that originate here in places like Canada and the industrialized world. If we are serious about carrying out our mission, this must be done. And that is why we find doing advocacy in the very mission statement of development and peace. And I'm sure for many of us who are on the webinar today, I know there are some longtime development and peace members. You'll know and you'll think when we talk about advocacy, one of the first things that comes to mind are the postcard campaigns of development and peace. And every year there are postcards to sign. And this is a picture of a stack of postcards from our Women at the Heart of Peace campaign from a few years ago. Just a small sampling of the thousands and thousands of postcards that are collected every year through our campaign in our parishes. Here's a picture of some development and peace members. Actually, that's a picture of my own parish, St. Cecilia Parish in Toronto. You know, whether it's in the church foyers or postcards in the pews, I'm sure all of us here have had that experience of collecting postcards to send a message, usually to the federal government, to address a social justice, global justice issue. And that's a shot from our Voice for Justice campaign, focused on the call for an ombudsperson, a struggle that still exists to this day to hold our extractive industry in Canada to account for environmental and human rights abuses that are perpetuated all throughout the world. Not only in our churches, but also development and peace members go out into the community. Here are some development and peace members getting postcards signed at a farmer's market that was part of our Create a Climate of Change campaign a few years ago as well too. So in our churches, in our wider communities, even just going out onto the street. Here, one of our youth members is out on the street at their university collecting signatures for a petition around the Syrian crisis and calling on Canada to play an active role in helping to bring about a just peace in Syria. And they don't only collect postcards, we then take those postcards or even without postcards, go and meet with our MPs. And Development Peace members have been meeting with MPs for many years, even when this guy on the screen was still an MP. They meet with them in their offices. They even meet with them on Parliament Hill. Young and old, engaging in advocacy work by inviting people to take a simple action, something as simple as signing a physical postcard, meeting with our members of Parliament, urging them to take action on important global justice issues is an important part of the culture of development and peace. And it not only rests with signing postcards and meeting with MPs, but going to the streets themselves, like this image here, where development peace was very present in cities all across Canada. This is a picture from New Brunswick in the global climate marches that took place in 2019. And at the end of the day, development and peace members are passionate, I believe, about carrying out the advocacy work because it puts a smile on our faces. It makes us feel alive, that we are part of transforming our world in a way that is truly just and in solidarity with others. And so to hear more about what that means for members of development and peace, what better thing than to hear from an actual development and peace member. So on that note, I invite our panelist, Kim Piché, to join us now. And Kim has been a long time, I actually don't know how many years it's been, Kim, but I know I've known you for at least 10 or 12 years. So it's got to be that far back. So Kim is a longtime member, and again works coordinating the social action for the English network in the Diocese of Montreal. Kim was very curious to see how I would introduce her today. Kim, and as I say, Kim and I go way back, and Kim has a, how to say it, a wonderful, calming and determined presence to bring forth the social justice issues of her time. And she's the kind of person that when she starts to talk, you stop and listen. So without further ado, I give you Kim Piché. Thanks for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you, Luke, for that introduction and for your introduction to advocacy as engaged members of DMP. So my name is Kim Piché, as Luke said, and I'm a long-standing member of Development and Peace. And I've been, to answer your question, Luke, I've been an official member for 4 years. But prior to that, I was engaged in Development and Peace through my role as Director of Chaplaincy at Ryerson University, and also in my time at the Newman Center at U of T as a theology graduate student. A little bit about myself. My dad was a local union member for electrical workers. And I think it was through him that I learned about how important it was that everyone had a voice. And in this case, it was for advocacy in safety, health, fair wages, and pensions for tradespeople. We'd hear the stories around the dinner table. But I learned a little bit about participation even at an early age. I have a family. I have a husband and a 9-year-old daughter. Well, she turns 9 on Monday. And we try our very best to live a zero waste lifestyle. I'm quite passionate about zero waste and try to put on our DMP training sessions through a zero waste model. We have brought this kind of practice into our pantry, into the amount of plastics that we let into our house. and into composting. That's my particular area of passion is composting and getting circular models of production into our lives and enjoying the fruits of them. I also live in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, Montreal, which I'm not sure if you know, has the highest number of people who identify as working poor in Montreal. That was pre-COVID. I haven't checked the stats since COVID. But mostly these are women who work in the healthcare field. And so this is another one of my passions, is working to create a culture and values that values invisible work, and especially caregiving work. My husband works as a national director for Jesuit Refugee Services, and it's from JRS International that I draw some of the terms advocacy and the ways to do advocacy today. Advocacy is about effecting change, activities that take place outside of court, that direct those with the power to make change in areas of law, policy, programs, or services, to take specific action. Now, there are many ways to engage in advocacy. You have private advocacy, which is sending letters or having a meeting with an MP or a cabinet minister to seek change, to persuade them to bring it to the table. It also includes doing research to help support that lobbying. Then there's public advocacy, which is using a public means to seek a change, which could be a letter to a newspaper, a sensitization campaign in public. And then you have, of course, in those realms, you have lobbying, which is persuading a decision maker to do something, networking, bringing people together to speak jointly, and mobilizing, as Luke mentioned earlier, which is encouraging people to take action and influence a decision maker. So here's the question. Can you trace the role of advocacy in your journey as an engaged DNP member? Perhaps you started out as an observer or simply received the education that DNP had to offer. But then you moved, maybe gradually or quite quickly, into more of a mobilizing or an engaging role in advocacy. Why is advocacy important to you as a member of DNP? And how has it challenged you to grow? And can you bring your faith into it? My first engagement in advocacy really came while I was working as a campus minister at Ryerson University. It's a liberal arts university in the middle of downtown Toronto. It was a visit to Honduras through a trip organized by DNP for campus ministers. There was a lot of seeing and listening to the stories of farmers, coastal villagers, Afro-Hondurans, and youth, all of whom were working against what seemed like insurmountable government corruption, unjust mining practice, and threats to their land. And when we returned to Canada, I began writing articles for the Ryerson Free Press. I started organizing events on campus and invited MPs at that time, which was 10 years ago, to tell us what they were doing to hold Canadian companies accountable for their mining practices in Honduras or in the Global South. This was just when Bill C-300 had been introduced by Honorable John McKay. So he came down to the Chaplaincy Center for a Café Honduras event. I wanted to make sure that people understood how DNP partners were working to empower citizens, especially the youth, in order to recover and reclaim their land of all things through a radio station. Now, to my surprise, here's one of the articles I wrote. This is 2010. It's backwards. To my surprise, the students at Ryerson had already been following the situation in Honduras. They accepted these articles and printed them, and thus the Roman Catholic chaplaincy became an ally to a group of progressive liberal arts students that would otherwise have dismissed the Catholic presence on campus. Now, network advocacy is another form of public advocacy that remains a big part of what I continue to do today. As the coordinator of social action at the Archdiocese of Montreal, I bring people together to speak jointly. I invite MPs to participate in these events, and then we lobby them or petition them, send them a letter, fill out postcards for responsible action. An example of this is a few years ago when we brought about 100 people together to walk from one Catholic church to another in Notre Dame de Grâce, about 3 miles, and to share the journey of some 68.5 million forcibly displaced children, men and women in the world. We had a member of parliament with us who stood on the Standing Committee of Justice and Human Rights, and he talked to us that day. Of course, we lobbied for a little more action to address the root causes of migration that day. So over the years, I have turned countless times to Development and Peace for their well-researched campaigns, their theological reflections, and for the encouragement and support that they give. Now, lately, I'm feeling a bit challenged to grow. Through my role at the Social Action Office, I work with some pretty amazing people, some volunteers. We call them the parish social action reps. They do social justice in their parishes in Anglophone Montreal. And their commitment and experience to private advocacy, so having meetings with MPs, persuasion, persuading them to effect change, is really spurring me on. And so we're going to hear today from the Faith and Action campaign connected to For the Love of Creation, which offers us an excellent way to advocate for climate change or for climate action, both in our own homes, but also with the federal government. So the place that advocacy has for me in the mission of development and peace, and as a member, is that it allows me to live my deeper call, which is to celebrate the diversity of life and encourage others to share our common home. It allows me to build new relationships around this call, and it challenges me to grow. Community salvation, Pope Francis is telling us today, is not just the sum total of all our individual good deeds. That's not enough. Salvation comes to us through networks of community and action rising up out of those communities and networks that are rooted in the love for the common good. Advocacy is a concrete way for me to trust that though there may be many crosses in the world, where there is communion, fraternity, and action, there is life. And this life is stronger than death. Thank you for your time and your ear.
Thank you so much, Kim. It was a wonderful testimony, and looking forward to having questions. There will be a chance for questions for Kim and for all our speakers once all our panelists have finished. But before we get to the dialogue, and having heard that wonderful testimony, we would like to now move on to hear about how today, right now, Development and Peace members, even though many of them are accustomed to, we only do advocacy in the fall, but actually year-round there are opportunities for advocacy. And right now, we, as Kim pointed out, the Faith and Action campaign of For the Love of Creation, what's it all about? We're going to hear more about it from one of the key people in this particular For the Love of Creation initiative, Karri Munn-Venn, the Senior Policy Analyst for Citizens for Public Justice. So glad you're with us today. Kerry, over to you.
Thanks so much, Luke. I'm really happy to be with you all today, and I'm pleased to be joining from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Wawaki, and the Omi-Mawiniweg peoples in rural West Quebec. As Luke said, I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at Citizens for Public Justice, and I'll talk a little bit about our work in a little bit. I'm also pleased to be able to be part of this broad collaboration of For the Love of Creation. I'm a wife and a mother, 2 teenagers and a 9.5-year-old. You know, when these things happen really matters. And I'm an avid knitter and crafter, and most recently a farmer, which has brought some really interesting perspectives into the way that I think about climate change, climate action, and climate justice. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And I'm going to start by saying fasting is not my strong suit. I've done it occasionally, but not at all gracefully. I really like good food, and I've been known on occasion to get a little hangry, you know, hungry, angry, if I haven't properly fueled my body. For many years, though, I have given up something for Lent. Several years ago, as I reflected on the practice of giving something up for Lent, I realized that somewhere along the way that this for me has turned into more of a personal wellness month than a spiritual practice. I usually gave up things like coffee, chocolate, sugar, and while I felt a little better, it seemed like I was really missing the point. Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with advocacy? And as it turns out, a whole lot more than you might imagine. Because at the same time as I reflected on what it was to give something up for Lent, I was neck deep in exploring the policies and practices needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, to meaningfully address climate change, and to support the flourishing of all creation. In that moment, I chose to believe that my experience of Lent wasn't unique, and that there might be a real opportunity to encourage a deeper experience by connecting the practice of reflection and renewal with climate action. Citizens for Public Justice, where I've had the privilege of working for the last 12 and a half years, is a national organization of members inspired by faith to act for justice in Canadian public policy. And we focus primarily on three key areas: addressing poverty in Canada, refugee rights, and climate justice. And it's been really interesting over this last few years in particular, as there has, not just within CPJ, but I think in Canadian society more broadly, an increased understanding of the way that these issues overlap and impact one another. And it's brought a richness to the work that we're doing that I'm really grateful for. In 2017 at CPJ, we launched a campaign called Give It Up for the Earth. And this was an annual Lenten campaign that combined personal action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so giving up something a little bit more substantial than coffee, and a call to collective action on our federal government to make policy changes to move us further and faster towards the Paris temperature goals. Over the years that we've ran this campaign, thousands of people of Canada have made personal changes in their lives and sent postcards to the government of Canada urging them to do things like put a price on carbon pollution, to end subsidies to the fossil fuel sector, to invest in a just, inclusive transition to a green economy. We were fortunate for the first 3 years of the campaign, Canada's Minister of the Environment and Climate Change was also CPJ's local member of Parliament. Having worked to establish a relationship with Minister McKenna through community events, every year at the conclusion of Give It Up for the Earth, a delegation, including CPJ staff, board members, which in our first year included Jen Gallant, who many of you will know through her work at DNP. But we would meet with her and youth. Here we also have a high school chaplain from the local Catholic high school and a student from that school as well. And we'd go and have a conversation about the campaign, but more importantly about climate policy and energy policy and the ways that Canada can be engaged. And this first year, actually I hadn't planned on talking about this, but I just remembered who I'm talking with. This first year was really kind of special because we finished the campaign at Easter, and then we had this long series of back and forth where we were trying to schedule a meeting and it wasn't working out very well. And I was starting to get pretty frustrated because I was worried that it just wasn't going to happen. So finally, late in June, we were able to have the meeting with Minister McKenna, and we went up and Asha, the tall woman in blue in the back, our intern at the time, was all queued up, present, give it up for the earth and explain how it worked. But before we had a chance to get into any of that, we found out that a couple of days before, Minister McKenna had had a personal audience with the Pope. And she came back really inspired and encouraged about the role of people of faith in addressing the climate crisis. And she said something, I wish I knew what it was verbatim, but she said something along the lines of, surely we can do more than give up chocolate when it comes to the season of Lent. And it was always kind of funny, because when you meet with a cabinet minister, you have to provide a lot of information ahead of time about what you want to talk about and what the issues are. And it was clear that she either hadn't seen the briefing note or wasn't paying attention. But it also gave us this beautiful window to say, yeah, I think there's a way that we can do this differently. Before I get into the specifics of the campaign, and I probably should have warned Luke that I had a bit more preamble maybe than he was anticipating, I want to talk a little bit about political engagement. And there's a few key things that I think are important to remember here. And the first one is that politicians are human beings. And that and I think most of the time, they get into politics because they want to make a positive difference in the world. We can all think of situations where that maybe was less true, or we see a lot of ego in politicians. But I choose to believe that at the heart of it, they want to make a positive change. And making that change, especially from an advocacy perspective, is all about relationship building. And it's not just about having relationships with key cabinet ministers, though that certainly helps if you want to have the conversation. But it's about connecting with individuals at various levels of government across the political spectrum. And one of the things that we've often found is really important and valuable in that context is to know that you'll almost always be able to find something in common with the people to whom you're presenting an advocacy ask, or a petition, or a postcard, or any of those things. So you start there. And what the other piece with that is that faith can often be a powerful point of connection, even if you don't share the same faith, or you're not from the same denomination as the person you're speaking with. Or I think actually in particular, if you don't share the same political views. If you can find those things, your shared beliefs, your shared values, and work from there, it can often open up a dialogue in a way that you might not have anticipated. So with that said, I want to talk about the For the Love of Creation initiative, the Faith in Action campaign, and the advocacy moment at hand. So late in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a now fairly infamous report that said that we had really within the next decade, so by 2030, really needed to make dramatic changes to bend the curve on greenhouse gas emissions globally to have a chance of maintaining warming to levels that really wouldn't lead to catastrophic change. So it was something that, it was a moment where a lot of organizations, a lot of governments sort of sat up to take notice. But in Canada, it was interesting because several national churches and faith-based organizations in Canada, including Development and Peace and Citizens for Public Justice, came together and we began a conversation about how we might deepen our collective action, recognizing that many of us had been engaged in climate action for many years, but that this seemed like an important moment that we should come together, and that we wanted to do so engaging our communities and really speaking into this critical decade for climate action. So these discussions led to the For the Love of Creation initiative, which was launched formally on Earth Day last year. So we're just coming up on our 1-year anniversary. And it worked in a few different areas: in theological reflection, local and congregational engagement, and political advocacy. So far, we have about 35, I think there's only 34 on this list. There's one more at least that has joined since this slide was put together. Initiatives that have come together. And it's really interesting because not only is Development and Peace present, but the Canadian Religious Conference, a large number of Catholic religious orders that have might
Kerry did warn us that her part of farm life is that sometimes the Wi-Fi is better on some days than others. So we're going to hope that Kerry is able to reconnect fairly quickly. So we'll just hold by there while you're paused, Kerry.
February 17th on Ash
There you
Wednesday.
are. Kerry, sorry, just so you know, you did cut there for like 10 seconds.
All right. So late last.
And she's cutting again. There's a certain irony to this because, oh, there, you cut again there, Kerry.
All right, I'm going to turn off my video because
okay,
that should help. My apologies,
sure,
everybody.
we'll turn off ours as well too.
All right. So on February 17th, we launched the For the Love of Creation Faith in Action campaign. And through this campaign, we're mobilizing people across Canada to reduce their personal and household greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time demonstrating support for increased federal climate action by writing letters to federal cabinet ministers on key climate justice issues. This year, like so many things, this campaign is taking place predominantly online, though some print materials are also available if that's something that would help engage communities. And we're going to run not just through this period of Lent, but all the way through to the end of 2021 with important follow-up and government relations work ahead of the UN climate negotiations, COP26, that'll take place in Glasgow, Scotland. Now, you'll see on the slide that we've set to end October 4th. We're in active conversation right now with Luke and others in the team at Development and Peace to make sure that we create enough of a moment for real active engagement from DMP members. So there could be some space beyond the beginning of October. That said, I want to talk now about why action, as Luke said, is important right now in this moment at the end of March, heading into April. And that's because, as I mentioned previously, we're in a critical decade for climate action. And while Canada has committed to net zero emissions by 2050, the plan that's been set out is insufficient. Even the new climate accountability legislation that was introduced at the end of 2020 doesn't include a near-term target. The first accountability target is 2030, which by any measure, the current government will no longer be in power, and they haven't expressed any willingness really to bring that closer. The other part that's really troublesome is that Canada's official emissions reductions target is still the pre-Paris target of reducing emissions by 30% below 2030 levels. Sorry, below 2005 levels by 2030. And again, this is something that the previous government before the Paris Agreement had set. And even we've had sort of some hints of a new target with a new plan that was released in December, suggesting reductions of 32 to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. But even at this level, it's incompatible with the Paris temperature goals of maintaining warming under 1.5 degrees. And it's also doesn't align with science. So decisions are being made right now in advance of the Earth Day Leaders Summit that's being hosted by US President Biden that will set Canada's course towards the UN climate negotiations in November. So we really need action now. So the For the Love of Creation Faith in Action campaign speaks to the desire of concerned individuals and communities to do something, while at the same time acknowledging that the scale of the problem requires government action towards systems change. It includes a personal pledge, as I mentioned already, and calls to action directed at the Canadian government. It's also interesting that this year's pledge not only includes a commitment to reduce personal or greenhouse gas emissions, but also to engage in acts of solidarity with justice-seeking communities, which reinforces that this isn't just about addressing climate change, but it's about achieving climate justice. So populations that have borne a disproportionate impact of climate change and are also more at risk as a result of some of the climate solutions are taken into account as we move forward. We know that we need to take swift and bold actions now to maintain global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels, and that we must do so in a way that addresses inequality and discrimination, reinforces human rights, and builds resilience in communities. We also know that while individual action is really important, it's not enough. So through the For the Love of Creation Faith in Action campaign, we're calling on the federal government to increase our national greenhouse gas emissions reductions target and commit to reducing emissions by 60% below 2005 levels by 2030, to invest in a just transition to a fair, inclusive, and green economy. We're also calling on the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, including but not limited to the right of free, prior, and informed consent. And finally, we want to see a commitment to equal support for climate change adaptation and mitigation measures in the Global South, and a commitment to scale up to our fair share climate finance contribution of at least $4 billion per year. And we've heard again that some of these elements might be addressed at this summit that's taking place on April 22nd. There have been signals from the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change that yes, some kind of announcement is coming, but we don't know if it's about the level of ambition, so the emissions target that we have, or about climate finance. There is legislation in play right now around the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that we are pressing to have passed, but it's really important that that pressure is there so that the government knows that this is an issue of concern. Now, I want to take a minute before I get into sort of how we do all of this. And I have to admit, it's rather disconcerting not to be able to see anyone on the other end. So I'm trusting that you can still all hear me all right. But I want to talk a little bit about why we've chosen to combine personal and political action and why this is important. The first thing is that personal environmental action does reduce greenhouse gas emissions slowly, because we can only do so much in our own homes, but it does have an impact on emissions and on creation. It also sends market signals to the business community that consumers are interested in sustainably produced goods and services. It supports sustainable business and plants a seed of a new sustainable economy. Taking personal action also creates psychological changes in how we see our relationship with creation and prepares us for the deep social and economic changes that we need to make. Unfortunately, uncertainty about what to do can also sometimes lead to despair, isolation, silence, and most problematically, inaction. And this inaction can be understood by politicians as approval of the status quo. Climate advocacy is therefore essential to creating change. Finally, when we tell our elected representatives that we are working to reduce our own emissions, it adds integrity to our call for climate or for government actions. So there you go. I told you that I had maybe a bit more of a preamble than what you might have anticipated. What I'm going to do now is I want to actually go into the For the Love of Creation website and show you a little bit about how this campaign works and how you can participate yourself. So if you just give me one moment to move over. So this is our For the Love of Creation website. I encourage everybody here to take a look and check it out. And when you come here to the Faith
Kerry,
in
we
Action
don't see it.
You don't see it?
No,
okay.
We're just, yeah, you're gonna have to try again there.
Well, I'm glad you can still hear me. That's encouraging. Can you see it now?
Yep, see it now.
All right, so here's our For the Love of Creation Faith in Action campaign page. It outlines a lot of what I've just said, and most critically, there's this section sort of when you scroll down a little bit about the action that you can take. We've spoken a little bit about the personal action pledge and the importance of taking action. So we've included here a downloadable pledge card. I've got mine here that I've, of course, because my video is not on, I'm not sure if I've got that in the right spot. But we are inviting people to pledge, to take action, to share that on social media, to talk about it with friends and family. And we've included a list here of some of the things that you can do. recognizing, of course, that taking climate action is not, it's not a checklist, it's not, but it's really, this is just some resources that we hope will help get people thinking about the kinds of things that you can do. Then on the advocacy side, we've got this series of letters, the first on reducing emissions and investing in a just transition. And almost everything is all laid out here for you. So all you need to do is to add your name, your personal information. And then when you scroll down a little bit further, there's a spot here that you can add your personal pledge. So again, we want our political leaders to know what folks are doing in their communities. There's a second letter on Indigenous rights, same format. And then finally on adaptation and mitigation.
And Kerry, could you, sorry to interrupt, but one of the really cool things about this, because there's a million online petitions, and I'm sure a lot of our people here who are here today have done a lot of that, but there's something that I find that's really neat about the particular way the Faith in Action campaign and has been constructed. And I wondered if you could just speak very briefly to also so that it's not confusing for people when they get there, the local affiliation and national affiliation tabs.
Yeah,
that
for sure. So the last thing, actually, before I do that, Luke, I'm going to go back. The last button you'll see on this screen is the register as a local organizer. One of the things that we have done is we've invited people to register as a local organizer. Let us know how many people you think you might be able to invite into the campaign. And part of this is about giving us the sense. So we know now that there are 80, we have 80 local organizers who are connected to about 6,000 people. We know that once DMP really gets on board with this, that number will go up because that's who you are and what you do. But each of those 80 organizers, and we'll have to see if I've got everybody in here yet, but you can let us know who you are affiliated with, which church, which local group, and then again over here, and this is, there we go. So you can select your affiliation with Development and Peace, Caritas Canada. And this is really important for us because it gives us a sense of the scale and the scope of where are we reaching, what communities are engaged. But also I think it's an important piece that, especially in this moment, allows us to build a little bit more community. And that's, of course, really challenging and important in this current time. So as I said, we have about 80 local organizers across the country right now, and I'm really hoping that among the folks that we have gathered here, you can help us take that to at least over 100. And we also know, and this feeds from the community piece as well, that an invitation from a friend to participate in something like this goes further than an institutional email. And I'm thrilled that over the years, it has been Catholics in Canada who have been most engaged in this type of initiative. So this is what we've got. We really hope that you will engage, especially right now in the lead up to the Earth Day Summit. If there are questions, I will drop my email in the chat shortly, but you can also contact us through the For the Love of Creation website. I will say here, I'm just going to do a quick demonstration. One of the other things that we're doing is all of the letters that go to the cabinet ministers here are also being sent to the Prime Minister and to your local member of Parliament. And by adding your postal code, that's what allows that to happen. So again, we can start to build and to see where there is action. And we also, part of this is related to the theory of change, that if enough people within the federal government are getting messages that we want action on this, that we have a better chance of success. So here are the tools. You've got a little bit of background, and I hope that you will join us for the love of creation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kerry, for that wonderful presentation. And we're glad you're your Wi-Fi kicked in and kept up there. We've been doing through Share Lent, we've been doing a number of webinar series, and usually the Wi-Fi internet concerns have to do with our panelists joining us from the global south. But I guess it just shows if you're on a farm in Quebec as well too, just as iffy. So
yeah, last week we were reassured that we're getting high-speed internet in rural Quebec, but we'll have to wait and see. But thank you, and I hope that I wasn't too choppy.
Not at all, not at all. So we have not too much time left. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A and kick off the Q&A with a bit of dialogue between the Q&A between us as panelists. So I want to thank again Kerry and Kim so much for your sharing today. And I'm going to share here my screen with an image to kick off our little chat here. Let's see, there we go. So this is a little time for dialogue. So Kim, you shared this picture, and I think I recognize that pledge card there. And I thought maybe I would just ask you, as a Development and Peace member, you've heard about the Faith in Action campaign for the love of creation. How have you received this? How have you found engaging it? And maybe you can tell us even a little bit about the photo that we're looking at as well.
Oh, sure. So that's my family. We took that picture in order to share it with the Center for Marriage and Family at the Archdiocese of Montreal. They had asked our office to come up with some sort of more faith and justice ideas for families throughout the Archdiocese during Holy Week, actually. So, so that's our pledge. I think it's great. Like Kerry was saying, it's an invitation to look inside our households and examine how we might reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. The list of suggestions are wonderful, but there's much more that could be added to it as well. And so it's great to do it. But the key sentence that I came across in this campaign for the personal household action is this: let those actions, the personal household ones, be a signal to leaders and the market that we are ready to adopt and advocate for a low carbon lifestyle. And we will favor political leaders and products in the economy that align with those priorities. I really found a lot of hope in that statement because, I could go around for ages asking people in the neighborhood friendly, to turn off their ignitions and, don't idle too long. And we can pick up masks, but really when you look at sort of these actions as a signal and the sort of the beginning of a movement of everybody being interested in low carbon lifestyle, ready to adopt it, it goes a lot further in terms of giving hope to all of us that are really trying to dream and vision that. If I may, I coordinate about 16, 17 people in parishes. We've taken something that Pope Francis has said in Fratelli Tutti quite seriously with respect to this campaign. He says, today we need to appreciate politics as one of the highest forms of charity. It's a great vocation, especially since it seeks the common good. And Kerry, you mentioned that when you said politicians are human beings, So what we've done is you've given us a great guideline, and we've gone and looked up at least 3 of those ministers that we're addressing those letters to. And we've looked at their mandate letters. So we've actually looked at what Justin Trudeau has asked them to do in their role. And we were amazed at the common values we share in terms of the language he's using and in terms of the Catholic social teachings. We kind of did a little study, I had a great social action rep who does a lot of research, Yvonne Burke, who did this work. And so now we feel like we know these people a little better, and we can now talk to them about our common values. And there's not enough time to share what some of them are, but preferential option for the poor, economic justice, stewardship for creation, solidarity, it's all in those mandate letters. Okay.
Thanks, Kim. I really liked how you brought Fratelli Tutti in there, and you spoke about that because, often and a lot of our Development and Peace members who are out there will recognize that when it comes to the Share Lent campaign and asking people to donate for our work in the Global South, they have an easier time than when we're asking people to sign postcards and take political action. And so many DMP members have stories of where, their fellow parishioners have said, well, what does this have to do with the gospel? Or what does this have to do with, taking the church should stay out of politics? And so I think that message of Fratelli Tutti, and even, there's a section in Fratelli Tutti that is titled political love. And the idea of political love, what is political love? And I think you said it so well, and the Pope has identified so well why this kind of advocacy, this kind of political action is in many ways the highest form of charity, is because it is concerned with the common good. You use that term, the common good. And this For the Love of Creation, faith and action campaign really, I think, is the thing right now where the most political love is needed. And as Kerry, you put out, you put it so well in terms of the reason why in this moment, that timeline is really, really striking for me. And both of you spoke about the challenge as well too, that really it's through this kind of work that Development and Peace calls us to, through working with those and For the Love of Creation calls us to. It's a challenge. It challenges us in our faith. It challenges us to kind of really take our faith seriously for what it means for how we are in the world, and not privatize it to our our individual lives and I think that really struck me from what you both said. We do have a question from Susanna, who's asking if there's a video that helps for youth, a youth-oriented video that would motivate them to be active in this For the Love of Creation campaign, because they have 3 parish groups in Ottawa, and a video would be fantastic. So this video, this will be, I don't know how appealing for youth this webinar video would be, but certainly those kinds of AV resources, if you look at I'm just thinking for us as Development Peace, and I'm sure CPJ and many others, many of the participants in For the Love of Creation have a lot of resources. If you look at our website, not only on the For the Love of Creation site, so there's social media, especially all of us have social media platforms, Instagram accounts that work really well as well too to spread the message. So there's a lot of great stuff that is out there, but for us at For the Love of Creation, we don't have currently like a snappy 1 minute, 2 minute video. So that's a great recommendation for something that we could have as well too. But there's lots of resources that people do have. There's also a question from Michelle. Oh,
sorry,
yeah, go
if
ahead,
I can
Kerry,
just jump in on that one as well. The other thing is, there are some resources listed on the personal action page that, and I'm going to add at least one podcast there that I think could be quite interesting and engaging for young people. But we're also available if there's, I know I'm not necessarily a snappy video, but if it would be helpful to have a conversation in this kind of format, I know that I'd be happy to do that. Others in the For the Love of Creation initiative are also available for that kind of engagement, if that's helpful. Yeah, I think, and I just wanted to go back really briefly to something that Kim said about and I think we can drop the link to the mandate letters in the chat. They're on the Prime Minister's website. But one of the things that's quite challenging in this space is that the language, the current government has really understood, I think, the essence of what needs to be done. But unfortunately, we're really seeing a disconnect, because the way that they speak about climate change and climate justice, I think, aligns very closely to a lot of the things that we're talking about. But in practical terms, there's a disconnect, right? To say that we now have a plan in place, and admittedly, it's a better plan than we've ever seen from the government of Canada before. And it doesn't line up with the Paris temperature goals. And the thing that I find personally really challenging is that the temperature limits of the world are not, it's not optional. It's not that progressives have said we need to do this, that, or the other thing. And it's the limits of the atmosphere that we're up against. So we really need to go further and faster to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I think that's, I think that's something that For the Love of Creation can hopefully put forward, and that we are putting forward, is to recognize that this is a moral issue. It's a spiritual issue. It's not a political or partisan issue, as you say, right? This is science. This is not. This isn't a time for partisanship. It's a time for us to unite, and that means we as people of faith have an important role to play. And I think that's one of the things that, and I'll go back to this issue of challenge, and maybe either of you can comment on it, and then before we kind of go into a closing prayer, because I think this is an issue that needs prayer as part of our political love as well too. But that's that, the vision of For the Love of Creation is that, look, we share a faith, and many of us share a faith who do not share politics. Even in our own parish communities, we know that we share a faith, and we share a faith community with people who do not share our politics. And the challenge within that is there for us is to be able to engage with our faith communities, with that shared faith that we have, in order to cross some of the political bridges that exist that put up barriers to this kind of action. So I wondered if either of you could comment if you've had any experiences with that, in terms of or your thoughts around the opportunities you see that through this Faith in Action campaign and the whole For the Love of Creation initiative, that we can build bridges within our own faith communities that will help move us forward in this conversation, and reduce the polarization that is, because we need to reduce the polarization if we're also going to reduce the melting of polar ice caps. So
yeah.
There's a really great article in the Sojourners magazine from, I think it was March or maybe February, and they're saying, the best scientists in the world are giving us about a decade to kind of really, like you said, Kerry, it's a moral, it's a spiritual, it's not optional, And so they did the math, and they said that's about 450 Sunday sermons before 10 years, a decade is up, And I was kind of touched by that, because you don't hear about this too often in preaching, in sermons, and what a place to bring it home, not with a hammer, not necessarily with a hammer, but to invoke the faith response here, I don't know what you guys think about that.
I think that's really interesting, and I will include a couple of a shameless plug for a couple of CPJ resources. These are two books that we published within the last. They're actually, this one, Living Justice, is focused more on poverty. It's 10 years old now, and Living Ecological Justice includes a series of reflections, actions, prayers, and activities that you can use in sort of at the parish level to get people engaged. And I'll be drawing a closing prayer from one of those books. But I think whenever I hear talk of challenges, and it certainly is a really challenging moment, the other side of that coin, of course, is opportunity. And I think one of the things that we're also trying to communicate here is that, and we've seen this a little bit, and it's despite real difficulty and real hardship that has been caused by the pandemic, it's forced us as a society to think, how do we do things, and can we do things better? And one of the realities that we're in right now is that if we look at investing in renewable energy, and especially actually if we look at green jobs, like if we take a much broader look at green jobs, healthcare jobs are low emissions jobs, right? Education is a low emission profession, and there's ways that we can look at what's going on right now to see how we can create a healthier society, how we can promote the common good. And when we advocate for a just transition, a big part of that is to make sure that people that are currently employed in the oil and gas sector aren't left out as we move forward. And what's happening in this context of polarization is we've got, especially in Alberta, but a government that's kind of doesn't want to address climate change. But we're seeing large layoffs followed by large layoffs without any kind of a plan on how they're going to support oil and gas workers. And part of what we're saying is we want a plan so that people aren't left out as we go forward.
Yeah, that's it's so true. And I think, that the word that you use, Kerry, opportunity, and the responsibility of the opportunity as well too, when you talk about ensuring that people aren't left out. I think for me, this pandemic has really put into a clearer focus the ecological conversion and transition that we're working toward, and the challenges that come with it. And I know it's out there a lot, like, oh, we don't want to go back to normal, and we don't want, in the narrative about this moment of transition and change. And there's this kind of everybody saying we can't wait to go back to normal, and then there's this narrative saying we don't want to go back to normal. And I think I've realized like how the degree to which we need to like really internally accept that it's not going to go back to normal. Like, and that's, once we can accept that and like feel that, like, and the pandemic really forces us to feel that, right? I think we're all wanting to go back to normal, and it's forcing us to really realize that, first we have to almost like grieve that the industrialized system that we live in and benefit from here in Canada needs to end. And you need to grieve that. And certain people within that system feel it more acutely and grieve it and need to be supported more than others, as you're talking about, right, in the oil and gas industry. And then once we can do that, once we can grieve it, we can start to see and the opportunity and feel it and be excited by it and imagining, what that world is going to be like and what we can do and maintain that hope. And I think taking this action through the Faith in Action campaign is a great way that we can do that. And so we'll wrap up now, I think, the official program, so that we'll go offline on our broadcast and stop the recording. But we'll finish with a closing prayer. And then after, anybody who has more questions, we can stay online for a little bit longer for anyone else who didn't get to have their question answered. So without further ado, let's move to what I think is a very apt closing prayer. Yeah.
Thanks, Luke. And this is a Franciscan benediction, author unknown.
Okay,
May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we can live from deep within our hearts. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation of God's creation, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who suffer pain, rejection, hunger, and war, so that we may reach out our hands to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless us with just enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in the world, so that we can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, Kerry. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today on this webinar. And we'll go offline now and wish you all a wonderful rest of your weekend and beautiful Holy Week ahead as well, too, as we go into Palm Sunday tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.